iRacing. 7 cars, 1 map.
So first of all, this is not me. This is Niels Heusingveld. You might know him from the Heusingveld pedals, and of course he also worked on a simulator, AMS or Automobilista. I'm not sure if he currently works at any simulator, but he has his thoughts about how things should work in a sim, and he expresses that in a video regarding aero maps in this case, and he compares that to iRacing and ACC. So it was quite an interesting video. Came across as a bit of a rant, to be honest, but I just want to look at an iRacing and let's see and compare, see how it works in iRacing and what the difference are between two cars. And in this case I compare the Ford GT with the Corvette GTE. Every moving object has an aerodynamic force that is proportional to its size, shape and speed. Aerodynamic force can be divided into a drag component and a downforce component. Drag is a horizontal force. This is a resisting force acting on the car which influences the top speed. The car's frontal area pretty much determines how much drag a car has. So we can look at the different specs from the Corvette and the Ford on the iRacing website. Just go through the car page, look up the Ford, click the Ford GTE, and we can see here the technical specs from this car, which is modeled in iRacing. You can see the overall width is 2045 millimeters and the height is 1030 millimeters. And of course we have to compare this to the Corvette, so we go back and we look up the Corvette. And here we can see the specs from the Corvette. The overall width is 2044 millimeters for the Corvette, which only is 1 millimeter apart from the Ford, and the height is 1149 millimeters, which is a significant difference. The Corvette is actually 120 millimeters higher than the Ford is, for 12 centimeters. So there should be a noticeable difference in terms of drag between the two cars.
This iRacing, we will see they use the same Aero Balance map for all the GT3 cars and also the 2 GTE cars that I checked. Exactly identical Aero maps.
So in iRacing we can go to Garage, and on the Garage screen we go to the Tire/Aero tab. It's the first tab, so it opens directly. And there we find the Aero Balance calculator, or Aero Balance calc. And there we can see a couple of things: front right-handed speed, rear right-handed speed, the wing setting and the front downforce percentage. And any of these things we can click and it does not affect the setup at all. So feel free to do whatever here. But the way to use this is together with Motec. We have to check the telemetry. Like for example, if you have one fast corner where you have oversteer at a certain point of the track, we can look up that very point, that very moment where you have the oversteer, and we can make the rear more stable, or by lowering the front downforce percentage. And we can do a couple things to do that. We can, for example, we can lower the rear and right height. If you change that from 75 to 70, we can see that the front downforce percentage changes to 43.8%. And we can also change the wing angle, of course. If you increase the wing, we decrease the percentage of front downforce because the rear gets more. So if we increase that by 1 degree, you can see we go from 43.8% to 42.9%. So now we load the session with the Ford instead of the Corvette. Again we go to the Garage and go to the Tire/Aero tab. Look at the Aero Balance calculator. It looks exactly the same as with the Corvette. We changed the numbers from 50 millimeters front and 75 millimeters rear to 50 and 70 millimeters and change the wing angle from 2.5 degrees to 3.5 degrees, and we can see that we land at the exact same 42.9% front downforce. So what we can take from this is that there is no difference from one another. iRacing uses exactly the same Aero Balance maps for all the GTE cars.
Kind of a shock, although I will come back to this and I'm not too mad.
So Niels was correct about the aero maps being the same between the GTE cars. You can see that Niels is currently in shock. So we will leave him be and move on to the Motec data analysis. So now we're going to analyze it a little bit further in Motec. And for this example I used the Spa-Francorchamps data packs for PDS, for the Ford and for the Corvette. To give you some overview, what you're looking at here is all the red traces represent the Corvette, the white traces represent the Ford, and on the color map in the top left here you see two dots. The red dot represents the Corvette and the white dot represents the Ford. Here in the top right we can see Aero Balance percentage. It's actually showing me the percentage for the whole lap, so I don't have to use the Aero Balance calculator in game for a single point. I can just look up this trace and I can see it for the whole lap. There under I see the speed trace, the delta trace, FRH and RRH, which is the front right height and the rear right height, and those are just the averages between the left front and the right front, or the left rear and the right rear. And then we get rake. Rake is just the difference between the front right height and the rear right height. And here in the bottom part we can see the traction control markers. So I want to see when traction control is active, and I also want to see how long over a lap distance in seconds am I using the traction control. So let's take a look at the error table from iRacing that I've put in Motec. So here you can see the error table. You can see on the FRH axis that when it decreases the front right height, it increases the front aero balance, and on the RRH or the rear right height axis, when it increases the rear right height, it increases the front aero balance. So for the most front aero balance, that would be the minimum front right height and the maximum rear right height. And we can see that all the difference in between is all linear and basically interpolated from another. It's a very simple model, there's nothing to it really, but this is just how it is. So if we analyze the color balance map, we can see the distinct differences between the two cars. Again, the red dot is the Corvette, the white dot is the Ford. And if we look at some key areas like Eau Rouge, we can see for the red dot, for the Corvette, it's starting to turn blue there, which means there is a shift in the aero balance, and it's actually turning towards the rear, so there's less front aero balance in that corner for the Corvette. And also in Pouhon you can see on the exit it's turning blue there for the Corvette, and also in Blanchimont through the whole corner it's also turning to the blue side of aero balance, which means in those high speed corners the Corvette has less front aero balance than the Ford has, and the Ford would have a more stable or more consistent aero balance through those areas. So if we analyze the straight line speed performance of these two cars, we can see that the Ford is actually a little bit faster on the straights compared to the Corvette. For example, here the Camel straight It's one of the largest ones on this track. You can see that the top speeds are 265.3 compared to 265.9 for the Ford. So there's a small difference, 0.6 kph difference, but what is important to note is that the Ford actually has a little bit more wing than the Corvette in my setup here. And also, if you look at the rake here on the bottom side, you can see that the rake is actually higher, so there's more rake on the Ford, which we can only conclude that there is a drag difference between the two models in iRacing, which of course we cannot see in iRacing on the setup screen. They chose to hide that from us, but from some other cars we can see that. So that's just a choice they made to not include that in the setup screen for the GTE cars.
I'm not mad at iRacing for applying exactly the same aero map to all these cars. I wouldn't do it. I think you can get the cars to feel a bit more unique, even if it's not necessarily realistic because you don't have the data. Who knows what the data is? I'd like to make them more unique. They went for let's make them all consistent and the same, probably because they don't have enough data as well. I think I cannot look into iRacing's list of data PDFs. So it's a choice, and I'm not mad at them. It's a choice they made. The cars are sort of consistent for each other. I don't know why they chose in iRacing to keep all these cars identical. That's something I would not personally do, but also there is probably simply no data available to them, just like there isn't, or sometimes isn't, with perhaps ACC, perhaps with RF2, perhaps with AMS. You simply cannot expect as a customer that each sim, no matter how hardcore it wants to be, has all the data.
So here Niels complains a little bit about the lack of uniqueness in the iRacing cars, which I could not find any evidence of in my short Motec analysis. Of course, only if you relate it to the Aero Balance map being exactly the same. Yeah, of course that's the case. So he was right about that one. The same balance map is being used for various TT cars in iRacing. But there are so many other aspects that make each car unique and make them feel like a different car when driving. So my short analysis from the two GTE cars on Spa, I already concluded that the aero drag between the two cars is different and that both cars move through the suspension travel differently. In the past I've tried a lot of sims and in my opinion the cars in iRacing feel the most unique from car to car. Of course a lack of data is and always will limit what is possible, but we take what is on offer and stick with the best option, which in my case is iRacing. This concludes the video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and don't forget to leave a comment.